8 different players and whether they are trending in the right direction after week 6 of fantasy football, or are they trending in the wrong direction? Can they change that in future weeks, or will their recent performances be predictive of how the future is going to go? We've got a lot of different names here on the slate. Fellas, let's start by talking about the man himself, Joe Mixon, who made his return in week 6. 13 attempts for 102 yards and a score. Caught 2 of his 3 targets as well for a score. 27.6 fantasy points on the day. Joe Mixon has been phenomenal to start the year. When he's been on the football field, he has scored 25 plus fantasy points, essentially, when he's been on the football field. So Cameron, I'll start with you because Joe Mixon has been your guy in years past. Is Joe Mixon going to continue trending in the right direction, or do we see this hot streak coming to an end soon?
I got to believe that it's going to continue to keep trending. I'm a little bummed that I did cool off on Joe Mixon this season, right? And that's my bad. I shouldn't have. I was worried about it. Older running back going into a new team, but he's looked awesome. He had 5.3 yards per attempt in week 1, 7.8 this season. We're kind of throwing out the Chicago game because he got injured halfway through it. But he's been using the receiving game, and they're finding the end zone, which wasn't really the concern. Is he going to be around the end zone on this Texans team? Because they're going to put up points. They're going to score touchdowns. He's got Green Bay and Indianapolis, then the Jets, Detroit, which are going to be 2 tough games, and then Dallas, Tennessee, Jacksonville. So I think this is going to continue to trend upward with this schedule and just the amount that the Texans are using him on offense.
Yeah, and as you were watching that film on the screen, I mean, when that B gap was open for Joe Mixon, I mean, he exploded through that. I mean, that's how he picked up his gains of 20 yards, of 59 yards yesterday. Now, Ty, I don't think it's fair for us to sit back and say that Joe Mixon is going to continue to be, putting up 25 plus fantasy points every week. But are you in the same boat as Cameron that more is still to come from Joe Mixon as the season progresses here, now that we have him back fully healthy?
Yeah, I would say so. Partially because of, again, this past week, he looked good. He looked healthy, right? That was the biggest question going into the week, was how is he going to look coming off the ankle injury? He looked good. So that gives you some optimism moving forward. And the other thing is too, they are committed to giving Joe Mixon the ball. We saw in week 1, I think this past week, 13 carries. We saw Dameon Pierce get 8. Those were some garbage time carries and stuff. I have to think that it was a bit of a snap count. Snap count may sound too dramatic, but I don't think they were willing to give Mixon the full load right off the injury. So if we're going to get back to what we were seeing in week 1, where they are going to stick with the run if no one's going to stop it. But again, this offense has been scoring. They're top 10 in scoring the last 3 weeks. So more yards, more plays, more points scored. That just means, even better things for Joe Mixon ahead.
Yeah, Joe Mixon in week 1 got the Indianapolis Colts, obviously a defense that you can run all over. And then this last week, the Patriots, who run defense isn't the worst in the league, but definitely one that you can take advantage of as well if you have a running back like Joe Mixon. Only 3 rush attempts in the second half for Joe Mixon. I found that interesting. You saw a lot more Dameon Pierce and Dare Ogunbowale get mixed in there, but I think that is a little bit to what you said, Ty. Like, let's get this guy's legs back under him. And once we know this game is within control, let's mix in some Dameon Pierce. Let's mix in some Dare Ogunbowale. And then obviously that leads to, a 41-21 rout of the New England Patriots. So yeah, I mean, you look at, again, Cam, you mentioned the matchup. You got the Packers and Colts coming up. Those are 2 teams you can exploit on the ground. I think we can expect to see more to come here from Joe Mixon. It's when you get the Jets and the Lions mixed in there with the Titans in the future weeks as well. It's basically to be hot and cold for Joe Mixon, where he has a really, really good matchup or a matchup where you're like, I'm not going to sit the guy, but, I'm not expecting top 5 production from him, which, as we transition, let's ask that question. Joe Mixon is running back blank rest of season.
Oh, I gotta think he's top 7 rest of the season. My only concern is getting to playoff time. That's my concern. I think he's a top 7 running back rest of the season, but the playoffs he's going to play Miami, and Tua should be back. We just got confirmation he's coming back this season. So if he is, we'd assume he's playing week 15 in Kansas City, and then against Baltimore, who's been the best rush defense in the NFL so far. That's a tough playoff schedule. Yeah. he's a guy that could potentially, like I said, I think he's going to be top 7 rest of the season that you look to trade high on later in the year. If you're like, I'm going to look for a better, running back schedule. And I think that also will really depend on, like you said, week 9 and 10, Jets and Lions. If he does great in week 9 and 10, right, and he proves, hey, with this offense, I'm pretty matchup proof, then you're okay. But if he has those really down weeks, then yeah, that would be when I would think I'm moving off him. But I think top 7, I think, is definitely within the realm of possibilities.
I think I would say he's somewhere in that 8 to 12 range for me, because I think some of the matchups, again, to go back to the schedule, Jets and Lions, you get Dolphins, Chiefs, Ravens in fantasy playoffs. It wouldn't surprise me if we're going to see, if we would see like Josh Jacobs type fantasy performances. But that being said, I could also see Joe Mixon still being kind of that mid to high end running back 1, just because, again, the team will commit to giving him the ball if it's working. So I'll say kind of that 8 to 12 range is just kind of a happy medium between those two extremes.
I think I'm with Cameron. I think I would put Joe Mixon running back 7 rest of season. I think I would put him top 7. I mean, I'm just looking at the guys we had, ranked ahead of him going into the season. Obviously, we have yet to see from Christian McCaffrey. Breece Hall, he's got to turn things around. Bijan Robinson, obviously great game this last week, but less than we bargained for this year. Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery is outscoring him at this point. Jonathan Taylor, Saquon Barkley, Kyron Williams, Devon Achane. We got to see how this offense bounces back. Travis Etienne, he sure hasn't been it. Derrick Henry rises up too. So, like, there's a lot of guys in here where you could absolutely make the case for Joe Mixon. Like, he might be on the best offense out of the lot of wide receivers or running backs, that I talked about there. But let's, instead of talking about how good Joe Mixon could be rest of season, how concerned we might actually be for Josh Jacobs rest of season. Look, it hasn't been great. On Sunday, 18 attempts for 62 yards. He did catch all 3 of his targets for 28 yards and 12 fantasy points. My biggest concern here is that he only had 1 run of 10 plus yards in this game. He had more runs under 5 yards than he did over 5 yards in this game. And that's not, and that's like a somewhat of an unfair bar to set. But like, when we put the film here up on the screen here in the sec, I mean, it is Josh Jacobs getting bottled up at the line of scrimmage very frequently. So, Cameron, where are you at? Is Josh Jacobs going to continue trending in the wrong direction here, or is there going to be a bounce back here for him soon?
So I think the floor is probably similar to what we saw with him last year, where he just never gets going from a fantasy perspective. Because he is 5th in rush yards right now. He is 3rd in attempts. His receiving is down. So that is a big part of it. He doesn't have that receiving floor that we saw for a couple of years in Vegas or in Oakland when he was on the Oakland Raiders. But I just lost exactly what I was going to say because I was trying to be funny saying Oakland Raiders. But anyways, he needs to find the end zone. That's the big thing for Josh Jacobs right now. He's only found the end zone 1 time. He's getting all the attempts. He's getting the touches. But that's why we're seeing 12, 13, 11, 12 fantasy points per game. Is if he finds the end zone in any of those games, you're very happy. He just hasn't so far. I think that's going to come with the way this Packers offense has been playing.
This was a Cardinals defense that looked like their number 1 priority on Sunday was, we're tired of getting beat in the run game. So we're just going to fill in every gap possible, and we'll let Jordan Love beat us. And that's what Jordan Love did. I mean, tossing 4 touchdowns on the afternoon. I mean, Jordan Love was phenomenal yesterday, and it came at the cost of Josh Jacobs. Ty, how concerned are you moving forward? Is there room for a trend back in the right direction, or is this going to be kind of the new normal here for Josh Jacobs?
I really feel like this is kind of the new normal. Now, that being said, he did just kind of go through a stretch of games. He had Tennessee, he had Minnesota, right, in the Minnesota game scripts. Like, it's been a weird kind of season for Josh Jacobs right off the rip. That being said, though, it's the scoring, because he's going to get fed. And the other thing is, too, he hasn't been the most efficient with his touches. Like, his longest run since week 2 is 14 yards. Like, the guy is not breaking off big runs. Now, you could also blame offensive line, all that kind of stuff. But the other part of this, too, again, back to scoring, when the Packers get inside the 10 this year, they have scored 5 times through the air and once on the ground, despite Jordan Love having 12 pass attempts and Josh Jacobs having 9 rushing attempts. Like, they are giving him opportunities. They're just not resulting in scores. So could you make the argument that like he's eventually going to find the end zone more often if they continue to give him opportunities? Yeah, absolutely. But what we've also been seeing is that they are doing better at scoring in this 10-yard zone through the air. So with the inefficiencies, the inconsistencies, then when they get closer to the end zone, I'm feeling like what we've been seeing is going to be more of the regular than any kind of major difference one way or the other.
I just really want Josh Jacobs to perform well in these games that he should be smashing. I mean, when they ran it, how many times against the Indianapolis Colts and he racked up 150 plus rushing yards, like you were still somehow disappointed in that day because Josh Jacobs didn't find the end zone. He didn't come through as a top 12 back that week. This Cardinals game, this is one that he should have smashed because teams have been smashing the ball against the Cardinals, but they sold out against the run. Josh Jacobs going to take advantage. So, like when I see they have the Jaguars coming up in week 8, when I see then they have the Bears coming up in November, they have the Dolphins coming up in November. I want to hold out hope, but then you get 2 matchups with the Lions, and we'll see how their run game is impacted by the loss of Aiden Hutchinson. I'm like, I am nervous for Josh Jacobs here, that unless if he starts finding the end zone here, unless if he kind of has like a, Ty, you call like Najee Harris a second half blossomer, right? Unless if we start to get that from Josh Jacobs where he's scoring touchdowns more often, I am concerned. We're going to be stuck with 12 fantasy points every single week, and he's just going to be sitting in that RB20 range. Like, that's not what I spent, an early 3rd round pick on to be a league winner this year when Marshawn Lloyd was struggling with injury, still is struggling with injury. So that's my concern with Josh Jacobs. I echo all of what you said. I do fear he is going to continue trending in the wrong direction. Before we go any further, though, got to talk to the 93% of you out there that aren't subscribed to our channel, but still consume our content. Look, I'll go as far as calling you a freeloader, but I say it with love because I know you're going to go ahead and change that right now by clicking that subscribe button. We have content for you 3 times a week, trending, ending like this, trade targets, and starts and sits for every week as well. So if you're looking to dominate your fantasy football league, want some additional content sprinkled on the side, make sure you're subscribed here. Turn on your notifications as well so you know when all of our newest episodes are up. Let's flip to the wide receiver here position, fellas. Wow. Spit it out, Lucas. Zay Flowers is on a little bit of a heater here. 9 targets in week 6. Caught all 9 of them for 132 yards. Good for 22.2 fantasy points. Currently the wide receiver 4 prior to Monday Night Football. Wide receiver 16 on the season. He has now had 9 plus targets and 100 plus receiving yards in back-to-back games. Ty, I'm going to start with you on this one. Can we start to trust Zay Flowers here? Is he trending in the right direction?
I'm torn because it partially has to do with the upcoming schedule. You've got Tampa, Cleveland, Denver, Cincinnati, and Pittsburgh. And you get excited about the Cincinnati matchup. I think you can get a little excited for the Tampa matchup just because Tampa is putting up points this year. So that requires some Zay Flowers utilization. But then you get Cleveland, Denver, and Cincinnati or and Pittsburgh. Those are games that Baltimore is going to want to control on the ground. And we've seen what happens when that's what Baltimore wants to do. We're seeing Zay Flowers just get 1 catch against Buffalo, 3 catches against Dallas. But the other part of this too, it's the high scoring matchups where he's going to get involved. So it's kind of a week by week thing. It's a matchup by matchup thing. I also just want to call out this game against Washington. He had 0 catches in the second half. Yeah. And it was an insanely efficient day because 85 of his 132 yards came after the catch. Now that's what you would expect with Zay Flowers. All that to say, though, I'm not sure if there's enough over the last 2 weeks for me to have full confidence and full trust in Zay Flowers.
Cameron, I think you put this in the doc. I mean, this is heavily correlated to how many times Lamar Jackson is throwing the ball in a given week. When Lamar Jackson doesn't have to utilize his arm and it's all coming through the Yeti, well, yeah, Zay Flowers is going to take a back seat. But if Lamar Jackson needs to toss the rock, even when they're feeding Derrick Henry, who again had another phenomenal day, 2 scores against the Commanders, if Lamar Jackson is throwing the football, Zay Flowers is clearly the number 1 wide receiver involved in this offense.
Yeah, like you were saying, weeks 3 and 4, Lamar had 33 pass attempts combined in those 2 weeks. And Ty said he had 4 catches for 30 yards between those 2 weeks. These last 2 weeks, weeks 4 and 5, he's averaging 34 pass attempts a game. And then we see 9+ targets. We see 100+ yards in back-to-back games. So Zay is, he's going to be up and down. And that was the issue coming into the year. I'll admit he's playing a lot better than I thought he was going to through the beginning of this season. Like that's where I've missed. It was the same thing with Jaden Reed. The issue with both of them is just how often are they going to be on the field? Or for Reed, it's how often is he going to be on the field? For Flowers, it's how often are the Ravens going to need to throw? Both of them playing better, but you're always running the risk of, hey, if Derrick Henry wants to have 25 carries this game, there's just not going to be enough passing pie to go around. He's had 24+ carries 3 different times. All 3 of those times, Ravens controlled the ball. So, like you said, Ty, Cleveland, Denver, and Pittsburgh, I got a feeling they're not going to really give the Ravens a run for their money as far as the offensive side of the ball. Ravens are just going to be like, okay, you guys can't put up points. We're just going to run it down your throat over and over again. So that is just the worry with Zay, is really high highs and really low lows.
Yeah, if there is, an offense that can compete with the Baltimore Ravens and what they can put out on the offensive front, you can expect Zay Flowers to be involved. But yeah, when it's the Dallas Cowboys, keep in mind, the Dallas Cowboys we want to consider them a high-powered offense. They put out this facade. I was listening to Underdog Football Show where Josh Norris had John Daigle and Ray GQ on, and Ray made the great point of this team has nothing to offer outside of the stacks and dollar bills they've paid to Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb, and that's what they're putting out on the football field. Like, they put their money where their mouth is. Like, this is how we're going to try and beat people, and it is not beating people. It has not worked. So, yeah, if a team can keep up with the Baltimore Ravens, you can expect Zay Flowers to be involved. But, yeah, I think you named it specifically. The Browns, the Broncos, the Steelers, the Chargers. Yeah. Dare I even say that the Eagles right now, who haven't looked great. Those are all games where I just don't expect those teams to be able to hang with the Ravens, and it is going to be a run-heavy Derrick Henry script. So that's kind of the trend and end that we're seeing with Zay Flowers here, is if you got an offense that can keep up with the Ravens, well, yeah, Zay Flowers are going to be involved then. But, if it is going to be so one-sided in the Ravens' favor where they, where an offense just can't keep up with them, you might have to tamper your expectations with Zay Flowers. Speaking of tampering expectations, I think we have to do so with Brandon Aiyuk, because golly, he was the wide receiver 60 this last week, 4 targets, 2 receptions for 37 yards, only 5.7 fantasy points on Thursday Night Football against the Seattle Seahawks. On the season, Brandon Aiyuk is the wide receiver 43. I know this isn't a panic or patience episode, but I'd be willing to bet that we are all panicked on Brandon Aiyuk, that we are like slamming the trending in the wrong direction button, if you will. So, Ty, how worried are you actually about Brandon Aiyuk?
I think we're officially in the pro Aiyuk or pro Debo offense for San Francisco, meaning it's either going to be a really good Aiyuk game or it's going to be a really good Debo game. This game just so happened to be a Debo game. I look at the upcoming schedule. You got the Chiefs, you got the Cowboys, you got the Bucks. Now, if the Cowboys can figure out their offense, next 3 matchups require points from San Francisco. And Jordan Mason, we have no idea how healthy he will be, at least for this upcoming week with his shoulder injury. But I think San Francisco is going to need Brandon Aiyuk. They're going to need the passing game to step up. This was also just a weird game, too, for the entire passing game for San Francisco. No one topped 6 targets. They spread the ball out, and it was a season low in dropbacks for Brock Purdy. So I'm hopeful that things can regress back to the mean a bit here, just because, again, it is a talented wide receiver on a really good offense with a really good play caller. That being said, though, I think we're exhausted I think that's the best way to say it. I think we're all exhausted and tired of seeing these kind of performances out of a guy like Brandon Aiyuk.
Yes, exhausted is a phenomenal word for this because we know how much better Brandon Aiyuk can be. We saw it last year. We've talked about it on the Panic or Patience episodes where we all knew regression was coming. But for it to be a meteor crashing into Earth like this is not what we were expecting. I do agree, though. I think there is room for a bounce back here, but it begs the question then, Cameron, of how much of a bounce back does it have to be in order for us to consider it a bounce back?
I mean, we'd have to start seeing, he's week 5 numbers pretty consistently where you're pushing double-digit targets, where you're seeing 8 receptions. Now he doesn't have to have 150 yards, but we got to be pushing, something like that. And his yards per reception has stayed high. That is the one thing, right? In his last 3 games, 24, 18, 18. But if you've only seen, you've had 2 games where you've seen 5 and 4 targets, it gets a little worrisome. And then I think the one thing we really didn't count on this year is Juwan Jennings has stepped up completely. He's just been another person in that wide receiver room that's getting consistent 4 or 5 targets. And in a team like we talked about last year with Aiyuk, where he was the lowest target total out of any top 15 wide receiver, that's pretty detrimental when you just have those targets being allocated somewhere else. And then the worry is Christian McCaffrey comes back week 10. They're going to keep running the ball the same amount when Christian McCaffrey comes back, but all of a sudden you got a guy who's commanding 6 targets again as well. So that's my worry with Aiyuk. And then Kittle's been a red zone machine, so you're not getting touchdowns there. It's just I'm getting worried because there's just so many different things happening with Aiyuk right now, or on that 49ers team, that just don't point to Aiyuk's season getting better.
Which is the ultimate concern. It's been the concern since this tandem united altogether, right? Where it's been Aiyuk, Debo, Kittle, and McCaffrey. And it seemed like, Kittle was the one that's just going to suffer from all this. But, Kittle has been second in line this year. It's been Debo 1, it's been Kittle 2, and then Brandon Aiyuk. And so, when you add Christian McCaffrey back to this mix, should he get, back on the field around week 10 or so, how does that impact things then? Does that take away from George Kittle and that goes to Brandon Aiyuk? Like, this is just the 49ers are, again, a game of roulette right now where I don't mind playing because this offense is way too good to not play. I will play every day of the week, but yeah, Ty, I think that word exhausted is such a good word to use. Of we got the one good game. Can we not just have like a normal 14, 15 point week? Like that's all I take 12 at this point. Just something to like appease my appetite and not go feast or famine every single week. That's the part that I'm getting impatient with Brandon Aiyuk is look, I don't need you to give me 20 every week. I'd love for you to give me 20 every week, but dog, I need some sort of stability here, whether it's between 12 to 15, 13 to 6. I don't care. Just give me something in the double digits so I'm not wondering if you're going to be startable in my lineup.
Yeah. I mean, real quick, you took Aiyuk to be a wide receiver 2 on your fantasy team. He's pretty much
late
in
second round.
Yeah, in some leagues too. Like I know best ball, like he got driven up when it was all that his contract was coming around and stuff. He's a low end flex just because of how inconsistent it is. So you have that, and again, it's you're hopeful, but you're exhausted.
Let's take a quick break here, fellas. We'll have 4 more players we'll discuss if they're trending or ending after the break. Today's podcast episode is brought to you by our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. Now, we love Underdog. It is the easiest place to play best ball formats, and they even have their own form of player props called Pick'em. You can make up to 20 times your money on a single night by correlating props together. 2 picks will triple your money, 3 will 6 times it, 4 will 10 times it, and 5 plays that all hit will multiply your entry by 20. You can even place insurance on your picks too, so if only 4 of your 5 props hit, you still get 10 times your entry. And if you use our code FELLAS when signing up, Underdog is going to double your first deposit up to $100. Alrighty, we are back. 8 trending or ending players after week 6 of the NFL season. We have so far gone through Joe Mixon, Josh Jacobs, Zay Flowers, Brandon Aiyuk. Fellas, let's move on to DeAndre Swift, who I don't know what they did with the actual DeAndre Swift the first 3 weeks of the season. I mean, this was a guy who we were debating dropping after the first 3 weeks of the season. 5 fantasy points, in week 1, 8.2 in week 2, 6.2 in week 3, running back 43, running back 32, running back 45. Terribly inefficient. Didn't have a single game over 3 yards per carry. And now he has come out, and this dude has been tearing it up. He's had 3 straight weeks with 16 plus rush attempts and 20 plus fantasy points. So, Cam, DeAndre Swift clearly trending in the right direction. How long can this trend continue, though?
Well, I gotta say probably 3 weeks. That's my guess. We were talking about it before. Mike Clay put out a great tweet. So these last 3 weeks, he has played the 30th, 31st, and 32nd ranked defenses in EPA, which means he's played the 3 worst defenses in the NFL. His next 3 opponents, Washington is 28th, Arizona is 27th, and New England is 25th. So pretty much all this means is DeAndre Swift has taken advantage of great matchups and has shown that he can kind of, he's starting to put it together, because over these last 3 weeks, he is the running back 2, averaging 23.8 fantasy points per game, which is, if you would have told me there was any 3-week stretch in this season where DeAndre Swift was the running back 2, I wouldn't have believed you. But I think he's shown, he's a capable back. They're going to use him in this offense. It's just once he plays like Detroit twice, he has Minnesota twice. Once he gets some of these tougher matchups, that's where I think we start seeing the dip again, because he's shown he can kind of disappear. Like we saw that in the beginning of the season, just disappears. All of a sudden we're talking about Roschon Johnson. So that's my worth. DeAndre Swift is he's got 3 good matchups, and then it just kind of fades into oblivion, similar to what we saw last year on the Eagles.
So what we can conclude is that Shane Waldron wanting to establish this team as a downhill unit against Carolina back in week 4 is confirmed. Like, that's what they're going to keep doing. If they can run the football, they're going to run the football. We're going to be a downhill team. It's easy to do that against bad defenses. It is when you face a good defense where that's really going to be tested of, are you actually a good team? Can you actually run the football and establish the run to set up the pass? Where, Ty, I think you had pointed out before the show, and I'll let you dive into this a little bit. I mean, we've seen a massive difference in Caleb Williams' dropbacks over the last 3 weeks compared to the first 3 weeks.
Yeah, Caleb was averaging 45 dropbacks per game the first 3 weeks of the season. And now, either because of the matchup or schemes or whatever, he's now averaging just 31 dropbacks in weeks 4 to 6. In some weird way, like, could this potentially set up Caleb to just kind of take the step that in these next 3 games, even though they are good Swift matchups, Caleb kind of officially breaks through a little bit, if it didn't really happen this past weekend, because let's be honest, like, the dude balled out this past Sunday. So Swift was really the one I was referring to when I was like, we may be backtracking. Not really, but kind of, sort of, just based on our stances, earlier this season. But that being said, I think what we see is that the light at the end of the tunnel is slowly fading away because, again, of the upcoming schedule and the gauntlet that he has to go through then to finish out the season.
You might have 4 games with DeAndre Swift yet. You just might. Like, they're on bye in week 7, but and Cameron, you named Washington, Arizona, New England. If Green Bay's run defense doesn't improve, you still got a fairly good match with the Green Bay Packers there too. If you want to run the football on them, it'll just be a matter of, can you keep up with Jordan Love in that game and what the Packers could potentially do on offense too. So, like, honestly, you might have a bright future ahead with DeAndre Swift. But similar to Joe Mixon, once you hit that trade deadline in your league, he's going to be someone I'm looking to flip for, a guy who's got a phenomenal rest of season schedule that might be a more high caliber player than a guy like DeAndre Swift. Because let me triple check DeAndre Swift's playoff schedule here, as I didn't expect to branch off in this direction as the episode started. Yeah, I mean, you get Minnesota, Detroit, Seattle. Oh man, that's not a playoff stretch that I want to mess with.
The 3 weeks before that is he goes Minnesota, Detroit, San Francisco, the Minnesota, Detroit, Seattle.
Oh.
So, I mean, you got the 3 weeks leading up. where it's just as gross. I mean, we're talking between Minnesota and Detroit and San Francisco. Those are 3 teams that could just completely shut this this running attack down. San Francisco's been a little bit all over the place with their run defense, but they're a team like we were talking about. They could put up 50 points on this Bears defense all of a sudden, right? And then you're not running the ball at all. So that's the worry with that end of season schedule for them for sure.
Yeah, so you've got a few more weeks to live here with DeAndre Swift, but once that trade deadline starts approaching in your league, and even once you start getting to like week 10 or so, it would be a good time to flip DeAndre Swift for a high caliber piece that has a great rest of season schedule, which around that time we'll be talking about players who have great rest of season schedules, playoff heroes that you can flip players for. So again, if you're not subscribed already, make sure you are and turn on those notifications because you'll be the first to know when those episodes do come out that will hopefully bring you home a championship this year. I'm dreading this next segment. I'm dreading this one because Calvin Ridley, oh my gosh. Can I read you all the quote? I think I sent it to you all earlier today. This is how I'm going to start this segment. Calvin Ridley did not mince words after the Titans lost to the Colts on Sunday. Calvin Ridley said, and I quote, I'll read it because this is a family-friendly show. I'll read you the Kids Bop version. I need some in the beginning of the effing game too. Ish is getting crazy for me. Calvin Ridley frustrated that he wasn't involved in the game plan earlier enough. 5 of his 8 targets did not come until the fourth quarter in this game. He caught 0 of his 8 targets, fellas. Calvin Ridley, very much trending in the wrong direction. Cameron, why is that? As I will show the people why.
It's his quarterback. His quarterback has gone Zach Wilson mode. It's been abysmal. It's like you don't even know what the first throw if you're watching on YouTube. It's how do you miss him that bad? And this isn't the first time he's missed Calvin Ridley on a walk-in touchdown like that. He had that in week 2 where he had Calvin Ridley by like 10 yards and he missed him. But this is unacceptable from an NFL quarterback. Yeah. You can't give a guy 8 targets and not connect on a single one of them, especially a guy that you just gave $92 million to. I don't know if you guys did because one of you sent it in our group chat of Calvin Ridley's upset. Yeah. He is not happy right now. He just hasn't been used. 33% catch rate is just ridiculous. So yeah, it feels like Amari Cooper with Deshaun Watson right now, and that's kind of where you have to be unless Will Levis can figure it out, or they stick with Mason Rudolph from here on out because it just doesn't feel like there's a lot of hope. I mean, it's all over Twitter, right? All the Will Levis has something new every week that you can make a meme out of. I mean, the guy is trending in all of the wrong ways right now, both on social media, but also in real life NFL as well. I mean, one of those plays again, it hit Calvin Ridley right between the numbers, so he should have caught that pass, yes. But those other 7 passes, it's sickening. It's disgusting to watch. I put in our group chat. I thought I made a mistake putting Spencer Rattler, Drake May, and Deshaun Watson in my quad box for Sunday Ticket because I wanted to see how they all would play. It turns out I dodged a massive bullet and not having to watch Will Levis yesterday. Because Tyler, man, oh man, Will Levis has been awful. So what do you do with Calvin Ridley at this point? Because nobody wants him after a goose egg. But what do you do given how bad Will Levis has been playing and how they might pivot to Mason Rudolph, which is like does not provide any relief in the slightest. But there's some. It's not a lot. There's some. Tell me how, because I don't feel any relief. I mean, hey, it was 2 years ago we just saw Mason Rudolph lead the Steelers to the playoffs. Like, I've got confidence in the guy. I'm kidding. Absolutely kidding. There's no good answer for what to do with Calvin Ridley. I mean, you trade him, you get 5 cents on the dollar. You cut him, barely get a bag of peanuts. Right. Like you cut him. I mean, you could, but who would on waivers, again, if Tennessee somehow salvages whatever passing game that they have, what option on waivers is going to be better than what Calvin Ridley can do in a salvaged passing game offense in Tennessee?
you've got to flip some players, right? Like you can't just have them sit on your bench and not do anything. You're just going to have to flip some players and try to go find a guy, a wide receiver to buy low on, or just a better receiver to essentially replace him, but you're not letting him go just because, again, they paid him to be the one in this offense.
Oh,
yeah. He's
What
a
a
throwaway
disgrace.
piece in a trade right now,
yeah.
which is gross. But the good news, Mason Rudolph, according to Kurt Betancourt, is Drake May with arm talent. So that's what we got to look forward to. That's what we got to look forward to right now is, and Drake May had multiple touchdowns in his first game. So yeah, this Mason Rudolph guy could be pretty good. That's all I'm going to say. Cause that's my first thought when I think of Mason Rudolph is arm talent and not Myles Garrett smacking him over the head with the helmet. But, I saw that.
You're so.
I saw that
Are
on
you
Twitter
serious?
today. Yes, I saw that on Twitter today. I'll find it and I'll send it to you too to verify it. But yeah. And then no. The worst part is somebody called him out on it, and he doubled down.
No,
Yes.
Kurt,
He doubled down.
you're better than this. You don't
Yeah.
need to be a social media troll. You don't.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
my
it's rough.
I will say the equation for Calvin Ridley is pretty simple right now. If they make the change to Mason Rudolph at quarterback, and things are just as bad, Calvin Ridley is a cut candidate in the next week or two, no question. If Mason Rudolph comes in and like salvages it enough where Ridley gives you like 7-8 fantasy points, that might be the worst outcome because you have to sit on him. But if Mason Rudolph comes in and if he is truly Drake May with arm talent and he's slinging the rock around the yard like Drake May was on Sunday, and Calvin Ridley is scoring touchdowns, giving you 14, 15 fantasy points, you go sell him as soon as possible. You go train him for whatever you can. Because I'll tell you right now, Mason Rudolph ain't going to be able to sustain that for more than 2-3 games. So the equation is very simple. Calvin Ridley is very soon going to become a droppable piece if this offense doesn't turn it around. The worst case scenario is that Mason Rudolph is like barely good enough and makes Ridley enough of a nuisance where you can't drop him, but nobody really wants him in a trade either. Like he would be a throwaway piece in a trade that you just feel gross about potentially giving up because you're just stuck with him and nobody really wants the headache. So yeah, it's bad in Tennessee with Will Levis at quarterback, and unfortunately, the plan B ain't any better right now.
Mm-mm.
All right, enough ragging on Will Levis playing like Deshaun Watson right now. If you're in the same boat with Calvin Ridley, like I am in one of my leagues where I thought I was set, like Calvin Ridley all of a sudden has become like my wide receiver 2 in one of my leagues because I lost Puka Nacua and Rashee Rice. So I'm rolling out DJ Moore, Wan'Dale Robinson, and Calvin Ridley as my top 3 wide receivers right now. Like if you're in the same boat as me, you're trying to figure out what to do, head over to our Discord. We got a community of 3,100 people over there who are ready to help you dominate your fantasy football league, who are ready to give you their thoughts on trades, on waiver wire pickups, whether you should cut Calvin Ridley, whether you should start Calvin Ridley still. We got a community there that's ready to help you out. So you can find that link down in the description of the audio podcast or YouTube video you are listening to. Final 2 players here, fellas. Couple of fun players, couple of young bucks here. And let's start with Bucky Irving himself. On the season, Bucky Irving has been playing very efficiently on Sunday. He got 14 attempts for 81 yards, added a score, caught both of his targets for 24 yards as well. Good for 18.5 fantasy points against the New Orleans Saints, who they put up 51 points on. I mean, this was complete domination from Bucky Irving from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers here, but we did see Sean Tucker get mixed in as well. With Rachaad White out, I think this was the game Bucky Irving needed to probably fend him off, not for good, but to solidify Bucky as the 1A here in this offense. So, Cameron, how optimistic are you for Bucky Irving moving forward after his performance on Sunday?
I'm optimistic that the Bucs can't deny anymore that he is a significantly better runner than Rachaad White. My only worry is just how much do they trust him in pass blocking situations compared to White? Are they going to give White the nod in some of those situations? But as far as running the ball, Bucky Irving this season, 58 attempts, 328 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Rachaad White, 51 attempts, only 7 left, but he only has 187 yards. He's averaging less than 3.7 yards per carry. Bucky's averaging over 5. That's a pretty significant difference when you're looking at who's running the ball. My worry, though, for the long-term outlook of Bucky Irving is now Sean Tucker coming in and being just another back in this mix, because Todd Bowles talked about it after the game, saying Tucker earned snaps. He earned touches because he looked so good in this one. So yeah, we have a 3-headed monster now. I don't want the head coach saying we have a 3-headed monster if I want to feel confident in Bucky Irving. So, well, I think he's the 1A. We could have a 1A, 1B, 1C pretty quickly here in Tampa Bay.
Yeah, and there was a reason why I left out 1B, 1C in that mix because of that exact quote, which I do fear. If we get Bucky Irving as the 1A, I think you're going to get Rachaad White as a few more weeks in the 1B because this team will still feed him for whatever reason. And yeah, you're going to start to get Sean Tucker, taking 20, 30% of snaps every game too, because it's going to be hard to keep him off the field after what he just showed. I mean, he outscored Bucky Irving on Sunday. Sean Tucker, 14 for 136 in a score, caught all 3 of his targets for 56 yards. Try almost doubling up Bucky Irving's fantasy points on the day. So, Ty, where are you at with Bucky Irving? Because this is the game we've been waiting for. I'll say this is the game Bucky Irving managers have been waiting for. For someone who wasn't super thrilled and wasn't too bought in on Bucky prior to the season, this is kind of like my worst nightmare in some ways of like, oh crap, Bucky Irving's playing really well now. I look stupid. But also, if it means Sean Tucker gets involved, I also kind of don't want to be right in that way if Sean Tucker is also part of the answer.
I just think it limits the upside of Bucky Irving. You got this performance and you're like, ooh, maybe I've got a consistent running back 2 that I can keep in my lineup for the rest of the year. With the Sean Tucker piece now, he's probably just a flex play and probably just with the right matchup too, which isn't the end of the world, but it's disappointing because again, you kind of bought in low on Bucky Irving at the beginning of the year, whether he was drafted in the late rounds or he was a waiver ad or whatever it was. You had secret hopes and the hopes were actually coming around and you're like, man, this would be awesome. Injuries, guys not performing, like you had a solution. It may not happen now just because again, triple-headed monster, whatever expression you want to use to describe this backfield. You just have to limit the upside or be cautious of the upside argument for Bucky Irving now moving forward.
I also don't want to blow this one Sean Tucker performance out of proportion either. For sure. I think that's the thing I'm like going back and forth on here is like what if we're all played a fool right now when Rachaad White comes back next week and he gets 20 rush attempts on Thursday Night Football? Like what if that happens and we all look stupid for actually thinking the Bucs were going to change, that we actually thought that, oh yeah, they're going to give the efficient guys the football because we've been waiting for them to, and they never have. When maybe they won't look in the mirror and say, man, maybe maybe we should give the ball to Bucky Irving more. Maybe the Sean Tucker guy actually does have more juice than we anticipated. I don't want to blow this game out of proportion. I think Bucky Irving has now become the 1A. I think Rachaad White is still the 1B, and I think you're going to start to see Sean Tucker play more of a, give these two a breather role. Let's get him in on some early down work. But I still think you're going to see Rachaad White catching passes out of the backfield. You're still going to get Bucky Irving, I think, as the 1A. But, we could also be 100% on in what we've been talking about here too, where this is a 3-headed monster between Bucky, Rachaad White, and Sean Tucker, where all these guys, give you 7 fantasy points on a given week and you're just not satisfied with any of them. So TBD on that. This is one to track. I think we can celebrate Bucky Irving. I think we can be happy with what he's given us, but this is one to monitor really, really closely over the next 3-4 weeks here and how this backfield actually shakes out. Last player to discuss here, fellas. Chase Brown of the Cincinnati Bengals. He has had 14 plus fantasy points in each of his last 3 games. This dude is very clearly trending. He outsnapped Zach Moss in this game, 33-24. Moss fumbled in the third quarter, and he didn't have a carry after that. And Chase Brown's day could have been even bigger too. Rushing touchdown, called back because of a penalty. I mean, man, as someone who, I won't put this on all of us, but like, all of us had our questions about Chase Brown this year. Are they starting to get answered on what Chase Brown's status actually is in this backfield, Cameron?
Yeah, I think they are. I think it's, we talk about, between Bucky and Rachaad White. Well, this Bengals team has no loyalty to Zach Moss. Really, because Rachaad White's been on that team for a couple of years. He's been with the coaching staff for a couple of years. Zach Moss was brought in as a free agent, and he was brought in on a deal that was kind of like, all right, well, we'll see if it works. We'll see if it doesn't. And the fact that he's looked more explosive than Zach Moss each of the last 3 weeks, right? The fact that he's outproducing him on the ground each of the last 3 weeks has been huge. It seems like they're still using Moss more in the passing game. They're using him more for pass blocking than they are for Chase Brown. So if Chase Brown can completely take over that role as well, then I think we could really see Brown take over in this backfield and be a low end running back too, probably the rest of the season on this Bengals team that's getting hot right now on the offense.
Yeah, I mean, if Chase Brown can figure it out in between the tackles, if he can figure it out in pass pro for this team, there's very little reason why Chase Brown shouldn't be playing ahead of Zach Moss. I mean, just based on what we're seeing efficiency wise, I mean, you saw it. He has had that quick footwork in between the tackles there. And then once he got through the first layer, I mean, he was gone. Nobody was going to catch him to the end zone at that point. Nobody was there to stop him. So if they can get him, in space on the outside where he can just explode, if he can figure it out in between the tackles, if he can figure it out in pass pro, I mean, there's very little reason why we won't see Chase Brown be playing, 40 snaps to Zach Moss's 20. But Ty, where do you lie on this backfield? Do you still have faith in Zach Moss, or are we going to start to see Chase Brown really take over?
I really think that this Chase Brown trend is going to continue because I see this very similarly to Bucky Irving and Rachaad White. Now, Zach Moss isn't as inefficient as Rachaad White, but Zach Moss is bottom 12 in yards per carry of all backs with at least 10 carries over the last 3 weeks. So you've got the guy that's looking better. The stats prove that Chase Brown is doing better. Now, the one thing that is getting Zach Moss on the field, like you mentioned, is the pass protection, and he's getting receiving work off of that. The thing is, what is stopping Cincinnati from officially stopping this 50-50, kind of you take this part of the game, you take this part of the game. What is stopping Cincinnati at this point from just letting Chase Brown just be the main guy in the backfield? I think we all see it the same way. This should continue unless Chase Brown, puts the ball on the ground, he picks up an injury, something like that.
Joe Burrow starts to get sacked at an unreal rate because he can't pick up pass blocking. I mean, that's the big thing for him.
Yeah, it feels like it's just a matter of time until we see Chase Brown. Again, we don't know what practices look like with Chase Brown and Zach Moss and all that, but still, that's what it feels like. It feels like it's a countdown to when Chase Brown kind of officially becomes, the guy that dominates the 60-40 split.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people just assume Chase Brown is in this receiving work role for this team, which is just not true because Zach Moss has been in on far more of those downs. He's been the far more active pass catching back this year because he can actually protect the passer in pass pro when he needs to. That's going to be the skeleton key here for Chase Brown is, can he improve in pass protection? And if he does continue improving in that department, if he can protect Joe Burrow and isn't getting Joe Burrow put on his behind, then Chase Brown is, to the eye test, the better player than Zach Moss. So that's going to be the skeleton key here is, can Chase Brown continue to improve in pass protection? Can the Bengals trust him in pass protection to put him out on the field in more of a fully flushed out role rather than just being the change of pace guy or the guy we just need to get some manufactured touches for here to get him in space? That's going to be the big thing for Chase Brown moving forward. So this trend should continue with the Cincinnati Bengals with Chase Brown, but we'll have to see how this coaching staff places their trust in him. That'll wrap out today's episode here, fellas. Make sure you're subscribed because we got 2 more episodes coming out for you later this week. Got trade targets coming tomorrow with Cam and Ty, and then our starts and sits video that comes out every single week as well. I will be out the rest of the week. So it will just be Cam and Ty hanging out with you all. They are kind enough to
party.
I know every episode is better when Lucas isn't on it because you don't have to listen to me blab for half of it. You don't have to listen to me try and come up with awkward transitions. No, they'll hold down the fort here the rest of the week. So make sure you're following them over on the socials. Cam Law FFF for Cameron on Twitter, Tyler_Plath for Tyler. And if you want a few comedic tweets from me along the way, if you want to help me go viral a few more times, that'd be great. Lucas Wenzel over on Twitter as well. Now, I actually know what it's like to get my phone blown up by Twitter now. I never knew before, but similar to what, not to, throw out a humble brag, but your PayPal notifications, Cameron. I mean, that's what it was like for the first like 5 hours when my tweet was popping off. It was a funny tweet. I'm glad that people bought into my humor.
Let's clarify PayPal notifications. I'm not like breaking in money myself. We had $3 things that come from Ticket. All right, let's just. I don't want the people thinking, "Oh, Cameron's over here rolling, getting PayPal notifications like crazy." Nah. All right. I just wanted to clarify that for the people.
You can follow the fellas pages too. FF Fellas on Twitter, the FF Fellas on Instagram, Fantasy Football Fellas on Facebook and TikTok, where we have even more short form content for you all. So if you like the podcast, we have shorts coming out for YouTube. Make sure you subscribe. Check those out as well. Like I said, Ty and Cam will be back later this week. We got our Sunday live as well. You'll be notified when we go live before kickoff. Until tomorrow, stay safe, stay healthy. We'll see you all soon. Deuces.
Deuces.